The US military has managed to pull something off that's quite incredible in the country of Niger. Now, as most of us know, the US military, for whatever reason, needs to get involved with every single conflict, needs to show how we are the best, we can take anyone out, come on, face us one-on-one. But in the situation with Niger, Africa, the US military did the exact opposite. They were willing to work with the junta. They were willing to stay quiet, stay calm, not get involved with the French, not get too involved with other African regions. And guess what? It worked. Because the US military has managed to strike a deal with the junta to continue military operations. Again, this is a massive deal considering you have the French who are being kicked out. You have their embassies, their bases that are being attacked by riots and protesters, government officials being captured. Meanwhile, the US military is like, hey, look, we want nothing to do with what's going on over here. We're here to bring the fight to your country to help you guys out. And I know a lot of people are always critical of the United States operating in Africa. They're taking advantage of Africans. But in this case, totally opposite. They're working with the junta to fight in the Sahel region. Now let's go ahead and read this article and see what the deal is and what exactly the US can do, because it's not total full-blown operations fighting militants. Nonetheless, there are drones going out so we can at least watch and do reconnaissance on the bad guys. A top U.S. military commander says Washington has resumed flying drones and other aircraft out of a Niger airbase more than a month after a coup temporarily halted those activities in the West African country. And guess what? In this video, we're going to look at another country, Mali, who's essentially halted their operations. And you can see what happens when even you stop just a little bit, you don't put a lot of pressure on these bad guys, the violence increases, and it's a really bad thing. So the U.S. military has been aching to get back into the fight, to put pressure on these bad guys, because eventually if you don't put pressure on the bad guys, you can't say the name on here, they can do bad things to not only Niger but other countries around the world. General James Hecker, Air Force Commander for Europe and Africa, made the remarks at the annual Air and Space Forces Association convention at National Harbor, Maryland on Wednesday. For a while, we weren't doing any missions on the bases. They pretty much closed down the airfields, Hecker said. For a while, we weren't doing any missions on the bases. Again, that was confirmed by the Pentagon, and Niger said all airspace is shut down. They pretty much closed down the airfields, Hecker said. Through the diplomatic process, we are now doing, I wouldn't say 100% of the missions that we were doing before, but we're doing a large amount of the missions that we're doing before. And he also went on to say that the U.S. is flying both manned and unmanned missions in Niger, adding that some of those intelligence and surveillance flights resumed within the last couple of weeks. So again, the U.S. military is actually a few weeks ahead of what we are actually getting as the public and what the Pentagon is saying. So this is good news to see that now the United States is actually willing and able to at least do reconnaissance through manned and unmanned flights. And I think Niger probably really appreciates this, but I don't know how everyone's going to be able to fight together if only one superpower and asset is actually bringing the fight to the bad guys. We have another statement saying the Pentagon's chief spokesman, General Pat Ryder, also confirmed in a statement that the U.S. was flying missions in Niger again, but said they were confined to protecting American forces. So this is very telling, and I think this is a policy where they have to justify or indicate, look, we have bad guys in this region, so we need to put some flights out there. Now this makes total sense as I'm making this video as to why the U.S. military left Niamey, the capital of Niger, and went to the central of Niger where there are other air bases to bring the fight to the bad guys, where the bad guys really are operating out of, because there was no threat for the U.S. military in the capital. The threat is outside the capital, in the desert regions, in regions where militants can hide, and the U.S. can now justify, if we're out in the desert and we're out in a location where we can be hurt, not in the capital, we have to fly these missions. After the successful July coup, the new authorities banned American drones from flying in Niger airspace, and the U.S. deployed in the country have been confined inside their military bases. Now, Let's go ahead and see what happens when you confine troops or you kick out major superpowers or you're not taking the fight to the bad guys. The country of Mali is finding out the hard way of what happens when you don't bring this fight. Again, I'm not here trying to be the American justifier. America does everything right. But in this case, it really goes to show what they're doing is the right thing by evacuating and getting out of the capital. We have nothing to do there. Let's show Niger that we're actually here to fight. At the time of making this video, within the last month, the country of Mali is not necessarily falling apart, but the uptick in attacks throughout the country, where attacks were never happening, is getting really, really bad. And this video will sort of explain what's going on, but understand, with the French out of there, with the UN leaving, and Wagner supposedly helping, which Wagner is a business, not a government and military entity, the country falls apart.
Violence in Mali is sparking fears of spiraling insecurity after a wave of attacks over the past 24 hours killed more than 60 people. They happen in the country's volatile northern Gao region, and the interim government says militants are to blame. CNN's Stephanie Busari joins us live.
Now, understand this. Again, you know Mali and Niger are border regions, but the issue is in the region of Niger and Mali where the borders are, these people bleed into a country like Niger where there's nothing happening. If these militant groups that the United States, the French, are not doing anything about militant groups, they can cross the borders freely back and forth. Because look, the United States doesn't work with Mali when it comes to fighting the bad guys. So if these bad guys come into Niger, and they can just operate, do whatever they want, they can run right back into Mali. And they're playing this border hopping game that's getting really bad. But for the first time in a long time, the fight is being brought into the regions, like into Mali, into Niger, not so much on these border regions where they feel a lot more comfortable to fight and operate, considering Mali is losing all of their security forces.
Now from Lagos, Nigeria, I mean, this violence obviously coming in the aftermath of two coups. Stephanie, that's why there is just so much concern about the future of Mali here.
Yes, things are seeming to spiral out of control in terms of the insecurity in the country. And some analysts are saying that since the coup, which happened first in 2020 and then in 2021, led by the same general who now runs the country, Mali has effectively turned its back on its Western powers. First, France left, with the French troops left, and now the UN peacekeeping troop, which has been in the country since 2013, they're on the way to leaving MINUSMA.
Something else that's interesting, the UN had also put out a report that while they were trying to move through Mali very recently, 57 kilometers took them 52 hours for an entire military movement to move through the country because they were being attacked so much and they were under a constant threat. So understand this, the French are completely gone out of Mali. The UN is semi there. Now, if I had to speculate, I'm assuming that the UN is taking their time to at least show that if we all leave, the country of Mali is going to be in a really big trouble. And when we have a lot of direct correlation to prove this.
Have been leading the peacekeeping efforts in Mali, trying to keep the insurgents at bay. We're not only talking about insurgents, we're also talking about ISIS, who are trying to gain ground in this region. So some are saying that Mali is going to be in trouble as all these peacekeeping forces leave and they find themselves somewhat isolated. And of course, Wagner, the Russian mercenary group, has been present in Mali since that second coup happened in 2021. But of course, Wagner is in flux. We don't know really where that organization is.
Now, I do need to say this. Also, recently, at the time of making this video, Wagner Telegram groups and Wagner social media groups, and that's how Wagner operates and how they sort of hype themselves up. Or it's a weird thing that they do, but they are sort of indicating and showing that we're bringing the fight back to Mali. We still believe in Mali because there was this trendy viral video showing a bunch of Wagner guys jumping out of their helicopter in the deserts of Mali, but we don't know what the time frame of that was. What we do know is that Prigozhin who was the head of Wagner before his plane crashed. We do know that he was dedicated to freeing the countries of Africa, more specifically fighting in Mali. But now, as this lady is saying, we don't know where Wagner is.
And what is happening with the fighters who were deployed to Mali. So there's against this kind of geopolitical backdrop that these attacks are happening. And the passenger boat that was attacked on Thursday was actually attacked again previously last week, and a local media reporting that a 12-year-old died in that previous attack. So things are looking very bleak, kind of security-wise, right now in the country, Zain.
Now, I know what a lot of you are saying. Why is the U.S. military and the United States even involved in these regions in Africa? Understand this. Out of every single country in the world that the United States military should really be involved with, it's actually Niger. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but understand this. Niger is smack dab in the middle of a region called the Sahel, or the Sahel. And this region, across many countries in Africa, is the leading number of militant attacks in the world. You can't say the word on here, but it's the leading number to where people get hurt, get taken out, where a lot of action happens that's not good. So because of this, it makes the most sense to put U.S. forces smack dab in the middle to bring the fight to the bad guys, so the bad guys don't bring the fight to allies or U.S. interests. So understand this. If you want to go look up a documentary or look up statistics about the Sahel, it accounts for about 43% of people getting hurt throughout the world, which is more combined than the Middle East and other really volatile areas, even like Southeast Asia, where a lot of attacks happen, and many people don't realize that. So understand this. This is why the U.S. military has been there since 2001, 2002-ish, and why the fight continues and why we can't leave. If we leave the Sahel region, it's probably going to uptick a lot more. That's how much of an impact the U.S. military has in the Sahel region and in the country of Niger. Now, the issue is this. The country who actually invited us into the Sahel with open arms is not only Niger, but French forces who have been helping us and who have been allowing us to operate freely without any sort of international pressure. The only issue is the United States has now lost their partner in the French, and this is how Niger is treating the French, and this is how the French is treating the country of Niger.
Niger's military regime accused France of deploying forces in several West African countries with a view to military intervention. Relations with France, Niger's former colonial power, degraded swiftly after Paris stood by ousted President Mohamed Bazoum following the coup in July. It should be brought to the attention of the public opinion, national and international, that despite the announcement of this withdrawal plan, France continues to deploy its forces in several ECOWAS countries as part of preparations for an aggression against Niger.
And this is a really big deal, and it sort of shows how Niger is also justified in their own actions, where the French and Niger has sort of agreed that the French will leave the country, because the French did say, we'll leave a small contingency within the country, but we'll take out like equipment. But then all of a sudden you're deploying troops in neighboring countries who don't like us. And if we don't like you and they don't like us, things are not adding up. And you guys keep saying, when I say you guys, I'm talking about the French president, other French assets, other French allies are saying, hey, military intervention, we have to do it, and we're going to do it. So that's why Niger is a little conflicted on actually working and trusting the French,
which it is planning in collaboration with the regional bloc. In August, Niger's coup leaders renounced several military cooperation agreements with France, which has about 1,500 soldiers stationed in the country. On Sunday, President Macron reiterated France's stance, demanding the release of President Bazoum. He emphasized that the redeployment of troops would only occur upon request from the deposed head of state.
This guy, the French president, is also not helping out a lot. Whereas the U.S. President Biden has kept his mouth shut, but also the Pentagon has kept their mouth shut. This guy is saying, I've been in constant contact with Mohamed Bazoum, who is captured right now, and he kind of is throwing a lot of people under the bus. Keeping soldiers in a very contested area, keeping the ambassador still. Another French government official has been captured while this guy sits comfortable in France. I mean, all the signs are pointing towards that France is almost trying to pick a fight and they don't want to leave. I'm not trying to pick on the French, but that's just what it looks like right now.
Since last July, a coup d'etat has been holding a democratically elected president hostage. France's position is simple. We condemn it. We call for the release of President Bazoum and the restoration of constitutional order, and we do not recognize the legitimacy of the putschist declarations since President Bazoum has not relinquished power. And so, if we redeploy anything, I would only do so at President Bazoum's request.
Totally different tone from the U.S. military in the United States saying, you know, we're going to take diplomatic means. You know, we still think that the president should be put back in place. But in all honesty, you guys figure it out while we are trying to fight our fight in our mission. So please allow us to help you out. Whatever we're doing, we will tell you about it. We'll help you out. Let us fly our drones. Let us fly our aircraft. And you guys can all settle this with however you want to settle it. But we want nothing to do with this. So again, as I started this video, I said the U.S. military has done something quite incredible, and I stand by that. Able to stay out of a international conflict, not getting involved with a coup, being able to work with the coup. And not only that, understand this, the U.S. military has worked with this coup technically for a long time. A lot of the leaders in the coup have been trained by U.S. Army Special Forces. The United States has shown that the only interest they have is fighting militant groups. They don't care about the uranium. They don't care about other natural resources. We can get that somewhere else. As far as fighting in the Sahel, we want nothing more from you than to allow us to fight, to cooperate with us, and to please help us out. And not only that, the U.S. military has trained a bunch of regional partners in the area to include Niger and the junta. So again, I'm making this video to show you guys and to update you guys that the U.S. military is bringing the fight back to Niger. Not to Niger, but in Niger. And the U.S. military has done the right thing. They kept their mouth shut. And I hope this is a strategy that the U.S. military can sort of invoke from here on now, because a lot of people have been critical, especially of the Afghanistan pullout and other operations like in Syria throughout the world. And this right here is finally a win for the U.S. military that I'm sure no one's going to talk about, but I do want to talk about to bring a little light and hope that the leadership in the U.S. military actually knows what they're doing, especially in the regions of the Sahel, which is very volatile and very dangerous.